Hi class, this is Professor Harmony Kim. This record is for week 3 lecture. Last week, you've studied Indian patriarchs who could be appeared as the next great world savior after the Buddha's parinirvana. These Indian patriarchs lived in the 1st to the 3rd century CE in India. Although they were conceived sort of Indian holy beings, saint, in Chinese sources, however, they were distinct from the original Arahant disciples of the Buddha to the Chinese scholars. The emergence of these masters in particular brought about a renewal of the Dharma. Chinese authors most frequently designated them as bodhisattva. These Indian masters initially and more frequently served to advance a variety of other projects aimed at developing Indian models of Buddhist sanctity that would integrate and supplement local Chinese religious traditions. In this context, the gap between India and China was both negated and exploited. This is a brief review of last week while you study. So, in the continuation of the last week, you will study two Indian patriarchs. They are Nagarjuna and Aryadeva, because last week you already studied Asvaghosha. According to the Dharma Treasury transmission, Nagarjuna was an aristocratic Brahmin from southern India. He was born under a tree and obtained true wisdom from a dragon, so he was called Dragon Tree. Naga means dragon. At a young age, he was surpassingly brilliant and had mastered the 4 Vedas and all the art of astronomy, geography, divination, and so on. Having perfected the branches of learning available to him as a high-born Brahman, Nagarjuna engaged in the pursuit for sensual pleasure by transgressing their social customs. He used magical power of invisibility and sneaked into the palace undetected. Nagarjuna and his friends have their way with the king's women. Therefore, many of the palace maidens became pregnant and reported this to the king. The king was wondered and then ordered that sand be spread across the floor of a palace so that the intruder's footsteps could be seen. In other words, the palace guardian cannot see the human figure, but if the sand spread across the floor of the palace, then the king thinks that the guardian can catch the intruders based on their footsteps. Sure enough, when Nagarjuna and friends returned to the palace, they were spotted, and the palace guards converged with sword swing. Nagarjuna's friends were killed, and only Nagarjuna escaped the onslaught. How he can survive? He had stood rigid and silent right next to the observing king. After Nagarjuna escaped the palace, he vowed to find a sramana from whom he could receive ordination right to renounce household life. Nagarjuna wandered the wild and met a Buddhist hermit who upgraded his scripture collection. Nagarjuna entered the mountains and found a Buddhist stupa where he formerly left home to follow the Buddha Dharma. Within 9 days, Nagarjuna mastered all of the scriptures that he could find. Nagarjuna proceeded to the Himalaya where he came across a monk who revealed to him the teachings of Mahayana. While Nagarjuna traveled to the Dragon Palace to perfect his qualities, his mastery of the Buddhist teachings and countless victories in debate made him arrogant, and he came to think of himself as omniscient. Nagarjuna wished to enter through Gautama's gate, indicating the highest conceit of considering himself equal to the Buddha. But Nagarjuna was confronted by the guard of this gate, who scolded Nagarjuna for his rude and disrespectful behavior. After this rebuke, Nagarjuna's incomplete knowledge was again confirmed by one of his own disciples. One of his disciples stated as one's opinion that Nagarjuna clearly had more to learn. Following this cue, Nagarjuna set out to remedy the deficiencies of Buddhism and establish his own teachings, complete with new precepts and monastic dresses. A great dragon bodhisattva observed Nagarjuna in this endeavor and pitied him in his boldness. Great Dragon Bodhisattva took Nagarjuna to his undersea palace. In the palace, Dragon Bodhisattva showed Nagarjuna a vast cache of unspecified scriptures that expound the doctrines of ultimate non-differentiation. Within 9 days, Nagarjuna thoroughly mastered all of the scriptures in the Dragon Palace, after which he deeply penetrated birthlessness and became endowed with the true endurance. Finally, Nagarjuna had at last found the right scriptures to give rise to his enlightenment. Then the Dragon Bodhisattva sent Nagarjuna back to southern India to propagate the Dharma. The king of South India was avid patron of non-Buddhist teachings, so Nagarjuna took it upon himself to convert the king of South India to Buddhism. In order to get the king's attention, Nagarjuna marched around in front of the king for 7 years, carrying a red flag. When the king finally asked who this flag-carrying character was, Nagarjuna replied that he was an omniscient one. And this time, Nagarjuna was apparently right. The king wanted proof of this, so he asked about the present activities of the god. Nagarjuna answered that gods were battling the asuras in heaven, and this was proven by weapons and body parts falling from the sky. With Nagarjuna's omniscience thus demonstrated, the South India king and thousands of Brahmins observe from atop the king's palace and submit themselves to Nagarjuna's superior wisdom and became followers of Buddhism. After a brief account of Nagarjuna's ensuing victories in debate over hordes of non-Buddhists, the text turned to an equally summary description, probably referring to the great perfection of wisdom treatise and what appears to be titles of three other texts, such as Adorning the Path of the Buddha, Expedient Means of Great Compassion, and the Treatise on Fearlessness, from which the middle treatise was said to have been drawn. The Dharma Treasury transmission, this text turned to Nagarjuna's facility with spells. This talent was demonstrated in a contest between Nagarjuna and an arrogant Brahman. This Brahman was advertised as a doctrinal debate. There was a doctrinal debate between Nagarjuna and arrogant Brahman, but quickly this debate turned into a battle of magical powers. The Brahman created a large pond with 1,000 paddled lotus upon which he sat. The Brahman said, Nagarjuna, you are sitting on the ground like an animal, while I am a lotus flower, wise and pure. How dare you match word with me in debate? In response, Nagarjuna called upon a six-tusked white elephant that trampled through the Brahman's pond. This uprooted the lotus and throwing the Brahman to the ground. Brahman became injured and humiliated. The Brahman submitted before the superior power of Nagarjuna and became his follower. The Dharma Treasury transmission recounted the death of Nagarjuna and transmission of the Dharma to his disciple Aryadeva. It happened that there was a Dharma master of the lesser vehicle who was zealous of Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna asked him, such as Dharma master of lesser vehicle, whether this lesser vehicle master would be glad if Nagarjuna remained in the world. The Dharma master answered that, frankly, he would not be glad if Nagarjuna remained in this world. So Nagarjuna withdrew to a quiet chamber and did not emerge for days. His disciple, Nagarjuna's disciples, thought this strange, so went to Nagarjuna's room to find out the matter. After getting no response to their knocks and calls, Nagarjuna's disciples broke down the door, looked inside, and saw that their master has departed like cicada shedding its husk. Temples for Nagarjuna were built in all the state of India, and he was worshipped like a Buddha. But before this, Nagarjuna transmitted the Dharma treasury to his greatest disciple named Aryadeva. Nagarjuna's life was traced along the lines of Shakyamuni's biographical template. In the Dharma treasury transmission, Nagarjuna was depicted as a precocious youth of aristocratic stock who experienced the utmost sensual pleasures through his escapes in the palace harem, as did the young Prince Gautama. Through this experience, Nagarjuna first came to realize that desire is the root of all suffering, and Nagarjuna left home to seek the truth. Nagarjuna wandered the forest and mountains and eventually found a monk who helped him along the path, but whose teachings did not lead him to true enlightenment, much like Gautama Siddhartha's encounters with a meditation master named Aryadeva Kalama and Udraka Lamaputra. Before Gautama Siddhartha fully enlightened, he had two teachers named Aryadeva Kalama and Udraka Lamaputra. They taught Gautama Siddhartha certain degree of meditation, but that was not sufficient to lead Gautama Siddhartha attain full enlightenment. Therefore, Gautama Siddhartha left two teachers. So this situation quite analogous to happening to Nagarjuna. Then, just as Shakyamuni first turned the Dharma wheel in the deer park outside Varanasi, Nagarjuna turned the Dharma wheel a second time after he Vaipulya scriptures were bequeathed to him in the undersea palace of a great dragon Bodhisattva. Finally, while there were various suspects for what had caused the Buddha's final nirvana, including a promise to Mara and a simple slab of bad pork, one tradition maintained that Shakyamuni departed the world because his attendant Ananda failed to request his continued presence. In other words, the Shakyamuni Buddha asked to Ananda about whether Ananda would want Shakyamuni Buddha continue to stay in this world or not. Venerable Ananda replied, "Please not to do that." Similarly, in the Dharma Treasury transmission, Nagarjuna's death was one of choosing and was precipitated by a Hinayana master who did not ask Nagarjuna to remain in the world. All of these sources adorn Nagarjuna with imaginary common to different Chinese religious traditions, and these serve to advertise Nagarjuna as worthy of adulation by Chinese adepts from all walks of religious life. Even nowadays, Nagarjuna is regarded as the second Buddha. Temples for Nagarjuna were built in all the states of India, and Nagarjuna was worshipped like a Buddha. Nagarjunakonda is a historical town located near Nagarjuna Sagar in Kunta district of the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh, near the state border with Telangana. So this is the location of Nagarjunakonda. And right panel shows the ruins of several Mahayana Buddhist and Hindu shrines are located at Nagarjunakonda. So Nagarjunakonda is the name of a location where Mahayana Buddhist and Hindu shrines located. Now, Nagarjunakonda lies almost entirely under the Nagarjunasaga Dam. It is named after Nagarjuna, a southern Indian master of Mahayana Buddhism who lived in the 2nd century AD. Nagarjuna is believed to have been responsible for the Buddhist activity in this area. Because of the construction of the Nagarjunasaga Dam, the archaeological relics at Nagarjunakonda were submerged and had to be excavated and transferred to higher land on the hill, which has become an island. Nagarjuna transmitted the Dharma treasury to one of his greatest disciples named Aryadeva. Before we move to Aryadeva, let's read one of Nagarjuna's verse. The sun of wisdom had been eclipsed, but this man caused it to shine again. The world has long been asleep in darkness, but this man awoke it. One may indeed say that his merits are comparable to a 10th stage bodhisattva, and his way is equal to the next Buddha. As I said, Nagarjuna is regarded as the second Buddha. Let's look at Aryadeva. Aryadeva was one of the disciples of Nagarjuna, and Aryadeva was a formidable Buddhist debater and converter of non-Buddhists. Aryadeva heralded trajectory of the Dharma in latter-day China and furnished models of Buddhist sainthood tailored to their medieval Chinese audience. Aryadeva were concerned about temporal removal from the Buddha and the degradation of the Dharma during Aryadeva's generation. This patriarch worked in dark times of soteriological degradation. Aryadeva wrote in the 100 Treatises like this: He rescued far and wide those who were drowning. Aryadeva rescued the deluded masses during this dark time primarily by composing the 100 Treatises. Aryadeva resurrected the true teachings in the land of Buddha's birth. In the medieval China, Aryadeva can be defined as an exemplar of Buddhist self-immolation. Self-immolation means committing an action of setting fire to himself, especially as a form of protest or sacrifice. The episode of Aryadeva's self-immolation took place with his encounter of the Brahmanical god Maheswara. Aryadeva visited a temple in southern India and admonished the worshippers there about how they should understand its golden statue of Maheswara. Aryadeva insisted that the god and golden image were fundamentally dissimilar by saying, "This God is truly divine, but what I see now is greatly inferior." Divinities should subdue the masses with their essential numen, but here gold and crystal are used as adornment to confuse the people. Aryadeva climbed up the statue and dug out its eye and said, "Essential numen is pure and not dependent upon form and substance." Aryadeva admonished that people should understand and respect the essential numen of Mahesvara himself, and not to be fooled by the mere adornment of gold and crystal, which is the form and substance of the image. However, Aryadeva never ever said that they should not worship Mahesvara through this golden image. He pointed out that it was only a question of how people should understand the God pure essence, infusing the superficial form and substance of the icon. This episode served to verify Aryadeva's earlier insight into the relationship between the God and its image. Then Aryadeva gave his left eye to replace that which he took from the golden statue. The bodily form of Aryadeva's own eyes was recognized as insubstantial and unworthy of attachment. Aryadeva admonished against attachment to the illusion of perduring self. Mahesvara's golden statue and bodily form, as well as Aryadeva's physical body, were all structurally equivalent and equally insubstantial. This kind of emphasis is apparent in numerous Jataka tales in which bodhisattvas gave freely of their own body in order to alleviate the suffering of others. Aryadeva thus expressed his devotions to Mahesvara by cutting out both the statue's eyes and his own, and exemplify the proper understanding of bodies, human and divine, flesh and stone, and of the bodhisattva's practice of self-immolation. Aryadeva became a model of Buddhist self-immolation. So, you've studied three Indian patriarchs: Aspaghosha, Nagarjuna, and Aryadeva. Aspaghosha and Nagarjuna were markedly expanded from their early 5th century account. Aspaghosha remained an arrogant Brahman, humbled and converted to Buddhism through debate, but also became a musician in Pataliputra. Nagarjuna's Dragon Palace adventure became a central climatic episode in the Dharma Treasury transmission. This presents Nagarjuna as a Buddha-like figure. Lastly, Aryadeva is represented as a model of Buddhist self-immolation. These Indian patriarchs in the cave of a great perduring saint were perhaps conceived to provide a potentially limitless source of Dharma propagation, tailor-made for Chinese Buddhist living in a world without the Buddha. So far, you've studied Spread of Buddhism from the perspective of Indian Buddhists. Let's examine the transmission of Buddhism in the Chinese aspect. In doing so, we need to consider Chinese pilgrims who traveled India to introduce Buddhism into China. Around the 1st century CE, the spread of Buddhism from northern India along the trade routes taken by merchants, monks, and travelers accelerated rapidly. To the north and east, Buddhism was transmitted with growing energy by the Sogdian merchants who play a vital role in linking China with the Indus Valley. Indian scriptures had been translated into Chinese since the first centuries of the Common Era. Missionaries from India and Kashgaria, which is modern Xinjiang, Parthians from Iran, Sogdians from the area of Central Asian republics of the former Soviet Union, had founded monasteries in Luoyang and Chang'an, where individual monks and teams of monks were busily translating the vast Buddhist literature coming out of India. There were also many Chinese monks who had gone west, at least 44 clerics before Xuanzang. The first one in 260 CE had traveled westward, though not all of them reached the land of their faith, India. So some Chinese monks were successful to arrive at India. Most of them were not. Among those who had gone west, in this class you will study Xuanzang mostly. However, there were other Chinese pilgrims who traveled India. One of them is Faxiang. Faxiang went to the west in 339 CE around his age of 60. Amazing. It's a quite old age at the time. Faxiang traveled India and Sri Lanka maybe 10 years or more. The red arrows on the map indicate the travel route from China to India and the return path by sea route. So, Faxiang returned to China via sea route from Sri Lanka, back to China. And during sea route, he stopped off somewhere in either Sumatra or Java. Once he returned, he spent the rest of his life recording his travels and translating the text he had brought back. I introduce Chinese pilgrim in chronicle order. So after Faxiang, the next Xuanzang is the most celebrated and influential of all the Chinese monks who traveled to India in search of the Dharma. He was born around 600 and started his journey in 629. After crossing the Taklamakan Desert and then the Pamir Mountains, he made his way to Kashmir, where he studied for 2 years before heading down to the Ganges plains and into the Buddhist heartland, India. He followed further studies at Nalanda University for some years and became a great teacher himself before going on pilgrimage round India. On return to Nalanda, he won a great debate and finally decided to return to China with his treasures of scriptures, relics, and sacred images. After many adventures and life-threatening incidences, he arrived back 16 years after leaving. He spent the rest of his life translating the text he had brought back. It took 16 years once he departed from China and returned to China from India. Xuanzang did not take sea route. Another Chinese pilgrim named Yijing. Yijing's works are very important for an understanding of the history of Buddhism and Buddhist sect, as he wrote extensively on his travel and the sect and practices he found not only in India but in the Malay archipelago also. He was an admirer of his predecessors, Faxiang and Xuanzang, and Yijing decided in his mid-30s to travel to the famed monastery of Nalanda in India. On his way, he studied disciplines and Sanskrit in the monastery in Sumatra. Somewhere here, Sumatra. He also studied for around 7 years in Sumatra during his return journey. During this time, he made translation of the more than 400 texts he had collected on his travels. He even traveled to Guangzhou and back to Sumatra when he ran out of writing materials. So he went back and forth, Guangzhou and Sumatra. Yijing wrote books titled A Record of the Buddhist Religion as Practiced in India and the Malay Archipelago. His second book, Chinese Monks in India, biography of eminent monks who went to the Western world in search of the law, all the information he was able to gather about Chinese monks who had gone to India before and during his time. I mentioned that we will focus on Xuanzang. So, Xuanzang was born in 602 and was brought up in a Confucian household. And he began to study the Confucian classic books about this time. But his older brother became a Buddhist monk, and Xuanzang lived with his older brother at the Pure Land Monastery. Xuanzang plunges into the study of Buddhist scriptures, both the early Buddhism and the mystical doctrine of Mahayana. Xuanzang was irresistibly drawn to this later Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, whose two key words were emptiness, which is signifying the object of wisdom, and another word, bodhisattva, or enlightened being who postponed their own salvation for the sake of others. While Xuanzang studied language and mastered the teachings of the various schools of Buddhism, Xuanzang formed serious doubt about some of Chinese translation. They were conflicting, garbled, and simply inadequate. Xuanzang came to feel that each abbot uncritically followed the teachings of his particular school. It's like an Indian fable of the blind man. Each blind man touched a different part of the elephant and taking it for the whole. In other words, some blind men touch the leg of elephant, and this blind man described elephant as like a pillar. Some other blind men touch the head of elephant, and this man described elephant as a round dome. In this way, some of their theories either vague and contradicted the Holy Scriptures. So Xuanzang wondered which precepts were authentic. Was it true that all people or only some could attain Buddhahood? Xuanzang was bewildered and unable to decide which theories should be accepted. Therefore, Xuanzang made up his mind to go to India to clear up his doubt and to bring back the complete Sanskrit text of what came to be called the Treatise on the Stages of Yoga Practice, written by Asanga. Xuanzang liked mastering the subtleties of numerous doctrines and talked with eminent doctors of philosophy in India and Central Asia. He knew that he must seek the source. At the time, his age was 27 years old. Let's think about the land route Xuanzang took around the 7th century CE. Before Xuanzang took the Silk Road, around the 1st century CE, there was the trade route set up by merchants, monks, and travelers. Through this route, Buddhism was transmitted with growing energy by the Saudian merchant in the Central Asia and middlemen who played a vital role in linking China with the Indus Valley. They own united network, so-called Silk Road. There are two big routes for the Silk Road. One is land route. The other route is sea route. So let's look at the land route first. It starts from northeast India, maybe Bodh Gaya. Then pass through this Central Asia, nowadays Afghanistan, and across Hindu Kush mountain and go to Balkh. Here's Balkh, and cross Kashiga. Kashiga is modern Xuanzang, and Kashiga was a good resting place for caravan. There were 4 of monasteries in Kashgar. From Kashgar to China, the route subdivided into 2. So here's Taklamakan Desert. Based on Taklamakan Desert, this above Taklamakan Desert is called Northern Route. This route is northern fringe of Taklamakan Desert, passing Kucha and Turfan. The bottom line indicates southern route, southern fringe of Taklamakan Desert, passing Khotan. Many Buddhist books were discovered in Khotan. Khotan was an important Buddhist center. These 2 routes, northern route and southern route, were converged in Angsi. Angsi is the area where Dunhuang Cave located. Dunhuang is the region inside the Angsi city, so Dunhuang was an important Buddhist center. Lots of religious discussion among monks, Buddhist art, and sculptures are found in Dunhuang Cave. Merchant trailers use this international highway, so-called Silk Road. And sea route, also some Buddhist monks, merchants from India to China, they depart from Calcutta and stop off Sumatra and go back to Zhanghan or Guangzhou. So we will study sea route later. Xuanzang followed the Silk Road. The red arrow indicates the route from China to India, and blue arrow indicates the route to return to China. So when he went to India, Xuanzang passed north rim of Taklamakan Desert, and when he returned to China, he took southern rim of Taklamakan Desert. We will examine what kind of Buddhist information or happenings could be found in the regions of Kucha, Balkh, Bamiyan, Kapisa, and even including Taxila. First, Kucha. Xuanzang visit the monasteries at Kucha. So Kucha is this. Kucha was perhaps the most important kingdom in Central Asia, along with its cultural richness of music and fresco painting. Kucha seems to have been a very important center of Buddhism along the northern Silk Road. Xuanzang wrote that on either side of the western gate of the city were two Buddhist statues over 90 feet tall. 1 month before and after the autumn equinox, large crowds would gather for 10 days here for religious celebration and Buddhist sermons. Xuanzang visited 12 monasteries in Kucha, and this kingdom has no fewer than 5,000 monks. So a lot of monks. The Buddhism practiced at Kucha at the time of Xuanzang's visit was an early form of Buddhism. Also, Kucha is well known as the birthplace of Kumarajiva. Do you remember? Last time I introduced Kumarajiva as a Sanskrit translator into Chinese. There are 236 caves at Kizil. Kizil Cave are located in Kucha. Kizil is a modern Xinjiang, so you can see many caves, and this is a statue of Kumarajiva, and Kucha carried cultural richness of music and fresco painting, as you see in this left panel. And if you go to this website, you can travel inside the Kizil cave. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful. You can see this painting inside the cave. So you just copy and paste, and then you enjoy watching inside the Kizil cave. Now let's move to Balkh. When Xuanzang arrived at Balkh, there were 100 monasteries and 3,000 monks who were early Buddhist, or called Hinayana Buddhism. Above all, the country was rich in relics. Buddhism flourished in what is now Afghanistan from the 1st to the 3rd century CE. Both the cave monasteries at Bamiyan and the thousands of stupas were built during this period from the 3rd to 5th centuries. So if you think about the flow through of Buddhism, from the 1st to 3rd century CE, the Buddhism flourished, and 3rd to 5th centuries, many cave monasteries and thousands of stupas were built. And in the 7th century, when Xuanzang passed through, Buddhism's dominance was giving way to a general revival of Hinduism. So Xuanzang felt some tendency of declining Buddhism. So Hinduism kind of take over the Buddhism. According to Xuanzang, two rich merchants named Trapusa and Balkh had brought Buddhism to Balkh with some legend. The legend is like this. At this time, two householders, such as two rich merchants named Trapusa and Balkh, meet the Buddha in his majestic glory, and this meeting gave the Buddha their traveling provisions, such as parched grain and honey. So these two householders offer grain and honey to the Buddha. Then the Buddha expounded to them what brings happiness to man and devas. And these two householders were the first to hear 5 commandments and 10 virtues. When two householders had received the religious teaching, they requested something to worship. Therefore, the Buddha gave them his hair and nail parings. However, these two householders did not know how to do worship. Before they returned to their native country, the two householders begged to have a rule and pattern for their worship services. Thereupon, the Buddha took his 3 garments, folded them into 4, piled them on the ground, and begin with largest and ending with the smallest. In other words, the biggest folded garment put on the floor, and then above it a little bit smaller size of folded garment, and then the 3rd garment once folded and then put on the top of all garment. Next, the Buddha took his begging bowl and inverted it on his garment. So once begging bowl is inverted, then it forms dome shape. Finally, he put his beggar's staff on top and said, "This is how to make a stupa." This story gives a convenient way to represent how a stupa looks with its square bottom, round dome, and tall mast. So you can see bottom, square bottom, or sometimes it can be round bottom, and above bottom there's round dome, and above dome there's tall mast. The symbolism is varied, but it has come to be thought of as a cosmic diagram in which the dome middle portion represent heaven sheltering the interior as a world mount. So the bottom is world, and dome represent heaven, and this tall mast symbolize the world axis. The stupa stands for nirvana, the ultimate goal for all Buddhists. Caravans were an important means of spreading the new faith. The two traders in the legend had traveled well over 1,000 miles from Balkh to India's Holy Land. These merchants who went back to Balkh and built a stupa also set an example of turning their material wealth into Buddhist work of art. So this stupa also bottom and middle portion dome shape, and it's like a stick. And usually inside the stupa, the Buddha's relic or master's relics can be stored. Now let's move to Bamiyan. Bamiyan is an oasis town where produce spring wheat, flowers, and fruit. It was suitable for cattle and afforded good pasture for sheep and horses. Xuanzang admired their simple and sincere religious faith. When Xuanzang arrived at Bamiyan, Xuanzang saw the reddish cliffs in the cold, clear air and saw 2 gigantic statues of the Buddha standing in niches carved in the mountains. These 2 Buddhas were actually 175 feet, so about 55 meters, and 125 feet, about 38 meters. Xuanzang called the large figure a Buddha image. This statue, Xuanzang called Buddha image. And the smaller one, this statue, as an Shakyamuni or historical Buddha. Xuanzang reported that in Bamiyan there were dozens of Buddhist monasteries and several thousand monks who were adherents of early Buddhism. And their chief tenet was the Buddhas are above earthly laws, an idea that is perhaps an approach to the conception of the transcendent Buddha of the Mahayana pantheon. However, this gigantic Buddha statue, actually the largest Buddha statue in the world, destroyed. Taliban armies bombed these ancient Bamiyan Buddha statues in 2001. So in this cave became empty. So the largest Buddha statue in the world became out of existence. And now the Buddha statues come back to life in Afghanistan, and you can watch the virtual return of the Buddha statue by this link. So if you copy and paste in browser, and you can watch what happened to gigantic Buddha statue at Bamiyan. Now let's move to Kapisa. Kapisa lies in one of the most scenic and historic valley in what is now Afghanistan. So there's a lot of Buddhist treasures buried in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the true crossroad of the Silk Road because it stands halfway between Rome on the one hand and Chang'an on the other on the east-west road. There were 100 monasteries with more than 6,000 monks, chiefly Mahayanist, around Kapisa. One of a monastery named the Monastery of Hostage because Chinese prince was taken hostage by King Kanishka. Xuanzang looked at one of the several carvings of the Dipankara Buddha at the Monastery of Hostage. So the name of the monastery is Monastery of Hostage. And from that monastery, Xuanzang found carving of the Dipankara Buddha. Dipankara Buddha is the predecessor of the Shakyamuni. Here is the story. A young man went out to meet Dipankara. Dipankara is the last of the Buddha of the past. And then when the young man threw toward Dipankara 5 lotus flowers, and these lotus flowers stay miraculously suspended in the air. This young man, if we look at this carving, the bottom part, this young man prostrated himself, put down a deer skin, and offered his long hair as a carpet for the Dipankara Buddha's feet. So you can see this, his long hair as a carpet for the Dipankara Buddha's feet. When the young man beheld the majesty of this Buddha, Dipankara knew that this young man wanted to seek supreme knowledge of the truth. Dipankara recognized the intensity of the young man's desire. We can feel even in this sculptural fragment. So Dipankara Buddha prophesied that in a future incarnation, the young man would become the historical Buddha Shakyamuni. So Xuanzang found this carving in the monastery of Hostage. On Xuanzang's journey in Kapisa, Xuanzang met the first Jain, the person who believed in Jainism, and Hindu ascetics. This was a foretaste of what he would meet in the powerful Indian continent to the south. In India, Hinduism has grown for 4,000 years. Hinduism had no single founder, but was composed of innumerable sects. The Hindus were united by the acceptance of a caste system and devotion to the ancient religious text known as the Veda. So, in 7th century CE, when Xuanzang traveled Central Asia and India, he realized that already Buddhism started to decline and Hinduism kind of take over the flourishing Buddhism. So after Kapisa, Xuanzang began entering India. So which side of India Xuanzang visited and what kind of happening occurred to Xuanzang in India, we will study this next week. So here is the quiz. Which of the following figure is the most similar to the Buddha with respect to the birth, enlightenment, and even the death? So you will study 3 Indian patriarchs, Aspaghosha, Nagarjuna, Aryadeva. So you know the answer. Who took the sea route to return to China from India? Some Chinese pilgrims only took inland route. Some Chinese pilgrims took sea route. Who prophesied Shakyamuni as the Buddha to be? You learned this today, so you know the answer. And you have to submit the answer of this quiz until April 25th, the coming Sunday. And this is the format when you submit the assignment. It's a routine format, but I just want to remind you again. So send email to me as well as include your email, and title subject is Bud 305 week 3. You can write down week 3 assignment, week 3 quiz, it's okay, but you have to include week 3. In the main body of email, write your official name. Last name, comma, followed by first name. Please do not swap the position. Last name, comma, followed by first name. Then you will write down answer of each quiz question. Again, the due is April 25th, Sunday, and this is the end of today's lecture.